Hello and welcome to a top... Nah, can't fool you. But seriously, welcome back to Marvel Month, and welcome to a game series that uses multiple characters of the Marvel comic world, the Marvel comic universe. So let's begin and take a look at the 3 Questprobe games.
RetroKork.
Questprobe is a series of 3 parser-based text graphic adventures that were created by the well-respected programmer Scott Adams, who, contrary to public belief, is not the same guy as the Australian skier. And he's definitely not the guy who created this Dilbert. No. Scott Adams pioneered quite a few of the things you would now consider adventure game staples when it comes to puzzles. And he published quite a lot of his games via his very own company, Adventure International. Now, Questprobe is his 3-part series based on properties handled by Marvel Comics. And it could have been a 4-part series with an X-Men based game that was in the works, but alas, it never got released. All of these games were released in both NTSC and PAL regions, with minor differences in the artwork, but I'm not going to go over those differences. Just be aware that they are there. It's usually slightly different colors. And in all 3 games you have to deal with the Chief Examiner, who was only created originally for this game series. He's an original villain. Now, the first game is featuring the Incredible Hulk. You know, the big green guy who sometimes on TV looks like Lou Ferrigno, though at least at the beginning you're playing Dr. Bruce Banner, who has already been exposed to a high dosage of gamma radiation and whose anger management issues, well, let's say they cause more havoc than anyone else's could, unless the other ones use very, very heavy machinery. Now, in this game, you're kind of stuck in some sort of computer simulation, if I understand it, though you start off being stuck in a dome tied to a chair. Later in the adventure, you encounter both Doctor Strange and Ant-Man, who at that time still was Hank Domestic Violence Pym. And then there are the villains Nightmare and Ultron, who are both at least mentioned in the manual, but who I myself haven't run into. Oh well, you can't have everything, I guess. But the gems within the environment are very important to your quest, apparently, and there's the Biogem, which, from what I understand, is where the hero's abilities are stored. In the second game, we have Spider-Man dealing with Mysterio. Well, not necessarily that much in the game itself, but in the setup comic, which is part of the instruction manual. I mean, how cool is that? Having a comic book in the instructions. Anyway, in the game you're pitted against various foes from the Spider-Man catalog, including Electro, Sandman, the Lizard, which is Dr. Connors, Hydro Man. God, it looks like the game wants to take on the Raimi Spider-Man 3 approach to villains. Oh well. On the other hand, Madam Web is out there to help you. And if you watched the 1980s cartoon series, you know how much help she can be. Oh, and one thing is important actually. Don't forget that Spider-Man can crawl on the ceiling as well as walk on the floor. And of course, in this game you have to deal with the Chief Examiner, who in all 3 games gives you a password when you beat it. So you have to deal with gems and more gems and the bio gem. And unfortunately, we have to come to an end with the games as the third and unfortunately last game, as you play as both the Human Torch and the Thing against Dr. Doom, who has taken Alicia Masters, you know, the girl that Ben Grimm is into. Well, Dr. Doom has kidnapped her, and of course there's the Chief Examiner as well. Now, in this third game, you switch between the two protagonists at your own leisure, plus you have to deal with fatigue. And you have a fatigue meter in the shape of a watch. So sometimes, yeah, you need to wait 10 to regain the ability to move on. And as I said, this game contains Dr. Doom and the Chief Examiner, but there's also the Blob, Xandu, and the Ringmaster appears, bringing his circus of crime into this game as well. Thought I had finished him off in the last game, oh well. Now, this game is done in a very similar style to the other ones. No, though there was no introductory comic coming with it, as far as I know. Oh, and none of the games have music in them, but to be honest, neither do comic books, so that's kinda adequate. Now, like I mentioned before, there was supposed to be a fourth game starring the X-Men, but unfortunately that was shelved forever when Scott Adams' company went bankrupt in 1985. You apparently can find at least the already finished part somewhere on the internet, on fan sites and other depth than that. There is a comic book adaptation of the game's intended story in issue 33 of Marvel Fanfare from July 87. And the conclusion for the Chief Examiner's storyline was ultimately told in the Quasar series, specifically in Quasar 35, 36 to 37, and Quasar 38. And thus, unfortunately, concludes the look at Questprobe, a very intriguing series of games if you ask me. Now, if you're into adventure games, I'd suggest you at least play the second part, the second game, as it has a parser that is kind of advanced. The one for the first game has kind of the same speech pattern as the Hulk himself, two-word sentence with rather small vocabulary. Okay, next time we come to the conclusion, unfortunately, of Marvel Month with a game that stars both Spider-Man and Captain America, as they both try to stop Dr. Doom in Dr. Doom's Revenge.